For all of you, you may think, does it matter that much who's our UUA president? But the UUA President, which is our Unitarian Universalist Association to which all our congregations belong, the president and the board they shape the conversations that we have over the years. And Sofia Betancourt will serve for 6 years. They also shape how ministers are trained. They also have input into that process. So it shapes the message I bring to you. So I want to tell you a little bit about her and hopefully why you should be so excited that she is serving for you. She is a child of immigrants from Panama and Chile. She says she identifies as African American and Latinx, and she says, even though I am a 7th generation Unitarian, I am in love with universalism. She's a minister, an educator, a scholar, a vocalist, a poet, a fiber artist, and a change maker. I read one of her poems a few minutes ago because I wanted you to hear her human side. Just a person walking down the beach while she's on vacation. I wanted you to hear her quest for meaning and ability to drop down into, like all of us, just being a person and being with nature and exploring herself. And the message she brings back. Betancourt believes that Unitarian Universalism should be building mutual, accountable relationships with one another as to how we live out our values every day. She will preach to you about unearned grace, all-embracing love, relationship accountability, dignity, and living in faithful community. She will also call you beloveds. Being called beloved, I'm not sure it really gets better than that. And I'm sitting in a hall with thousands of people, and when she's calling us beloveds, you feel like you are being spoken to as an individual. So while I'm starting this sermon about Betancourt, her story is reflective of the entire tone of our denomination at the 2023 General Assembly that I went to in Pittsburgh. Ministers gather 3 days before General Assembly opens to everyone. We learn about new ways about thinking about church. We worship together. We do a lot of choir rehearsal. And we think about how trends in our country impact our congregations back at home. This year, there was a pretty large focus on fascist techniques and how people in power in our country are now using fascist techniques even though they are not fascists themselves. I'm going to give you, I don't want to go too far astray from Betancourt about the fascism lectures, but they're interesting and they're worth knowing about. We were warned to look for people describing a glorious past, an inaccurate portrayal of how life was perfect. And look deeper. Life was never perfect, but they push out this vision of life being perfect, especially for people in power. Secondly, a simple narrative of victimization by those who have historically held power and privilege. Third, attacks on transgender people, on people of color, and on the poor. Blaming the poor for being poor. Telling repeated lies until they seem like reality, particularly lies about this victimization narrative. When I hear people doing the victimization narrative, I always ask them about what are the specific things in their life. How have they had things taken away from them? And I have never heard a single example. So there was a great emphasis on Unitarian Universalist fellowships being one of the places where coalitions can be built to fight against fascism, and built by building community partners, because no one can do it alone. But as ministry days, transitioned over to the larger General Assembly, the focus moved from the fascism piece, well, not completely, but to doing church in new ways. How to support the multi-platform church here. Thank you, those on YouTube. I don't know if all of you know this, but there are at least 12 people on YouTube every Sunday morning. Yeah, sometimes there's more. There's people, and many people in our congregation say, oh, I watched when I was on vacation, or I can't come on Sunday mornings, but I'm watching on YouTube a couple times a month. The ability to zoom into meetings so that you can still volunteer even if you can't get here in person. The continued focus on dismantling white supremacy culture, or white dominant culture, if that is a phrase you prefer. How do we support our volunteers, our religious exploration teachers, our children's education professionals? How to stay in community when conversations get difficult? How to support our younger adults and families who can't be here every Sunday morning because they are really busy people? How to share the good news through outreach. Unitarian Universalists, we're always bashful. We're not good at evangelizing. And so how we can do that without an abrasive approach. And how we can be faithful to promoting and acting upon our values within our families, our congregation, and our wider world, including supporting equity as a spiritual value. The message to our smaller congregations was, choose a few things and do them really well. Don't stretch yourself so thin with programming. Now, ironically, I will say I'm about to ask all of you, what would you like for fall and winter programming here at UUFB? So while I'd love to hear lots of ideas, we will probably have to narrow that to just a few things. Also, for us to stop seeing success by how many people are in our chairs or pews on Sunday morning. That can't be our only metric. And don't get me wrong, I love seeing all of you in the chairs on Sunday morning. It is so quiet and a little lonely when I arrive here really early and the lights are off and I come up here and I practice the sermon one last time. So I'm overjoyed when you actually all come tumbling in later. But it's also the small groups that meet during the week. It's the ice cream social this afternoon for the women's group. It's those of you who volunteer together out at places like Family Promise and the Food Bank and Fork and Spoon. It's all of our good friends out there on YouTube. It's where we show up in the community. So there were huge questions at General Assembly, and before I list a few, it's important to understand how your new president, the Reverend Dr. Sofia Betancourt, is describing liberation theology. And remember, her family is from Panama and Chile. I quote her, "Latin American liberation theologies often speak of a preferential option for the poor, but also for a range of inequities in our living. The preferential option teaches that God themselves, the work of the church, our values, our wisdom, are most centered on those most impacted by systematic oppression. Traditionally, one might say, if you want to know God, live in solidarity with those facing the injustices of poverty and class oppression," unquote. Remember, Pope Francis also comes out of that liberation theology. And that's why his work has had a different tone than those before him. So I'm about to read a few things off of this list, and I will just say, put on your seatbelts. What does it mean to gather in religious community? And what's underneath that question is, in what ways does being part of a religious community redefine what it means to be human? How can we do that better for ourselves and not let the media do that for us? What sustains you? Is it the knowledge that we are being held by something greater than ourselves? Perhaps that is a divine presence, or perhaps it's the presence of nature and the presence of one another. Perhaps it's rituals you find here that speak to you. Does our chalice lighting still light the way for those seeking safe haven? And if you're new to Unitarian Universalism, you may not know, but our chalice was a symbol in World War II. It was a symbol of haven, safety, aid. It was a symbol of hope and healing. And it's a symbol of the spark we carry within. What is it in our faith that captivates us, that turns us toward one another in recognition of our worth? So, and lastly, even though I'm skipping a few, how often do the Sunday morning services in your congregation provide you with something that is understood as a call to action? So I'm writing all these out with all these bullet points, and I'm like, too many words, I'm overwhelming them. So I started pairing some of these together. Can the things that sustain you also move you to action? And do you see yourself as accountable to something that is larger than yourself? So pick one of those to work on this week. I may stick these in the newsletter next time, but just pick one. I'm going to give you a little shorthand. What does it mean to gather in religious community? What sustains you? When you come here and experience the lighting of the chalice, does that still provide you with a feeling of safety and hope and healing? What is it in our faith that captivates us and turns us toward one another in recognition of our worth? And what calls us to action? Just pick one of those to work on this week. I want to acknowledge that while all these questions were very much alive at this year's General Assembly, most of them were originally presented by doctors Sharon Welch, who's a theologian, Dan McAmmon, who's a historian, Sofia Betancourt, and Elias Ortega Aponte, who are both theologians. The fact that all these ideas are with us so strongly 6 years later in 2023 attests to their importance. And you'll see them at the forefront again and again in the 6 years of Betancourt's presidency. I am thrilled that she's our new president, and I totally understand why she ran unopposed, because nobody felt like they could do better. She's thoughtful and warm, she's child and family centered, she's affirming, she's brilliant, she's caring, she is one of the greatest UU theologians of our time. And she's always recognizing just our day-to-day struggles and our joys. She'll challenge us on what we believe and why we believe it. And it's a wonderful opportunity to deepen our faith and our faithfulness. And I'm going to end with her words. Unitarian Universalists might say that we are able to co-create the all-embracing love that our tradition teaches us when we center those impacted by long established injustice. We save one another. We remake the sacredness of the world through prioritizing what is truly needed in the remaking. Anything less drives us away from our faithful living. And did I also mention she will call you beloveds? Amen.